The classroom smelled of glue and warm metal. Light came through dusty windows and fell on a long table. On the table were scissors, tape, coils of wire, small mirrors, and a battered old radio. Children sat on stools. Their hands moved fast. The teacher, Ms. Rasa, smiled and looked at them with tired, bright eyes. "Your project for the year," she said, "is simple. Make something that can look at the sky and tell us one small thing." Her voice was soft but sure. The children cheered. They thought of stars and rockets and stories. The city outside the windows had been under siege for months. Food lines were long. Power blinked in the afternoon. People learned to live with sharp edges. The children learned to make small gifts out of broken things. Armin was 12. He was quiet and careful. He liked to sit by the window and mend a toy until it sang again. He kept a small notebook in his pocket. On the first day he drew a simple idea, a probe that could float above the city and watch storms and lights. It would not be a war machine. It would be a school thing. It would dance on the wind and sing back what it saw. Days passed. The classroom became noisy with work. A boy named Sammy wrapped copper wire around a soda can like a soldier wrapping bandages. A girl called Hina painted a small mirror with bright stripes. Ms. Rasa taught them how to solder a loose joint and how to fix an antenna. They used an old radio for a brain and a toy rocket for a shell. They tied a tooth from a clock to act as a sensor. It looked like a million other small things in the room. It looked harmless. On the day of the launch, parents came. The mayor came too, with his polite smile. The probe hung from a string while Armin checked a thin strip of tape. He felt the weight of every quiet hand that had touched it. He put the final knot. The toy rocket whistled as it rose. The children clapped until their hands were warm and red. The probe climbed and floated on a near wind. It had a small camera glued to its side. It had mirror flakes that flicked like small fish. It had a microphone that did not care about neat data. It liked the sound of a city in rain and the whisper of laundry on a line. The children watched the feed on a battered screen. They laughed at the small clouds. They cheered at the silly wobble. Then the picture changed. The probe's cameras showed a line of empty space above the western gate. Sensors painted the area in thin light. The siege network had lots of eyes. Big ships watched from the edge of the blockade. Drones scanned the sky like knives. But in that wide band the probe saw a short stretch where the sensors did not read. It was a blind corridor that cut like a small door. Old equipment on the probe soldered in the wrong place, tuned to the wrong frequency, picked up a quiet signature. A small, pulsing glow hid behind a curtain of sensor noise. The cameras showed a metal box half buried in shadow. Someone had placed a power feed there. It hummed like a sleeping bee. Armin replayed the clip with shaking hands. He watched the glow that no one had wanted to see. The children were quiet. The mayor's smile froze. Ms. Ross's chest tightened. The probe had not been designed for war. It had been a school toy that listened wrong. It had found a gap. Word moved faster than the cooling of soup. An officer from the city command arrived with a face that did not smile. He walked to the table and put his hand on the screen. The feed showed the blind corridor again, the small box, the soft pulse of power. He did not ask much. "Who built this?" he said. Armin put his hand forward as if the probe might break. His voice was small. "I did," he said. "We all helped." The officer's eyes were like flint. He looked at the mayor and the parents. "We need that probe," he said. "And the boy who built it?" In the yard outside, food lines moved in slow rows. In houses people listened to the radio and did not laugh. The siege had been a slow thing, fat with rules and small cruelties. Commanders had maps and drones and doctrines. They had never thought the sky could be read by glue and children's songs. They had never thought a toy could find a blind place. Inside the classroom, the children were not proud. They were afraid and tired and strangely brave. They had wanted to learn about storms. They had wanted to watch clouds. They had not meant to change a plan of war. They had not meant to hold a secret that could make a door open. Ms. Rasa held Armin's shoulder. Her fingers were steady. "We will share what we found," she said. Her voice did not shake. The officer nodded and left with the clip on a small drive. He did not promise the probe would return. He did not promise the boy would come back to his desk. That night, the classroom felt like a place without walls. The sky seemed louder. Armin lay awake and thought of the small pulse on the screen. He thought of Hina's painted mirror and Sammy's copper coil. He thought of the mayor's frozen smile and the officer's flint eyes. He had built a toy to wake the sky. The sky had woken. Outside the city, a fleet watched the blockade like a slow fence. One ship darkened its sensors and turned its face away. The blind corridor was small, but it was a break in a web. Someone on the other side of the watch saw the clip the officer had taken and understood that the little door could be a path for people, not only for weapons. In the quiet of the classroom, Ms. Rasa blew out the single light and looked at her students. "You did not make a weapon," she said. "You made a question." Her words were small and heavy. Armin touched his notebook and wondered what answer would come. A call came before dawn. The city had decided. The officer's voice over the line was breathless and steady both. "Bring the boy. Bring the probe. We move tonight." Armin put on his jacket. He took the probe in his hands like a bird. He did not know why his heart beat so loud. He only knew one thing: a small room's work had reached past the rusted gate and into the wide sky. A child's question had become a choice for many. The probe's light blinked once like an eye. The city waited to see which way the door would open. The command hall smelled of oil and paper. Bright screens sat like small suns along the walls. Men and women in dark coats moved with quick steps. Armin stood at the edge of the room. He held the probe like it was a small animal. His hands felt cold. An officer who had come the night before stepped forward. "This is the boy," he told the room. He built the probe. The room quieted. A tall engineer with grease on her hands stepped down from a ladder. Her name was Captain Zainab. She looked at the little rocket and then at Armin. She smiled only a little. "Show us how it works," she said. Armin climbed a chair and put the probe on a larger table. His voice was small, but steady. He pressed a thin switch. The camera feed flicked on. The mirror flakes shimmered. The old radio hummed. The engineers leaned close. They asked small questions. Armin answered with the simple words he used in class. He pointed to a coil and said, "This makes the sound the radios ignore." He tapped the painted mirror and said, "The mirror hides light the wrong way." Captain Zainab listened and then she clapped once. That clap was like a gate opening. Around the room, people who had never cared about toy rockets began to care. The mayor who had smiled earlier watched with a different face. The officer folded his hands and did not speak. In the workshops beneath the hall, the probe was not a toy for long. Engineers took the body and left the soul. They added small motors and leather straps. They did not put big guns or armor. They wrapped the probe in tapes and bits that the siege network would not expect. They made mirror flakes in patterns that would confuse the scanners. They tuned the radio to sing a human noise no machine had learned to read. The work was loud and fast. Hammers tapped. Solder hissed. The children's small songs were recorded and looped into a signal that felt like a market bell. Armin watched through a glass window. Sammy and Hina came to the workshop as volunteers. They felt like part of a secret that had grown too large for a classroom. Captain Zainab taught them to hold tools. She taught them to work with quiet pride. The children learned to turn a school toy into a path for people. That night they ran a test. A small craft, guided by the adapted probe, lifted from a hidden hangar. It flew low, under the blind corridor the classroom had shown. The engineers watched feeds and maps. The probe's camera crawled past the half-buried box. It lived on small things, a seam in a panel, a rusted bolt, a soft hum. The probe sang its human sound. For a long breath the sensors around the gate blinked and were confused. A convoy waited on the other side of the gate. Trucks full of bread and blankets sat in the dark. Soldiers checked lists. Mothers held children close. The convoy had been stuck for days. Every attempt to push through met the same cold net, drones and beams that cut engines and burned tires. When the probe reached the hidden node, it did something the big machines did not expect. It did not scream. It whispered. It slipped a tiny mirror into a vent and it played the recorded market sound into the air. The node's sensors wavered. For a breath it forgot what to count. A small light went dim, then off. The power feed the node used to scan cooled like a hand that sleeps. Captain Zainab watched and stood very still. "Now," she said. A driver turned a key. Engines glowed in the dark. The convoy moved. They slipped through the blind corridor like foxes through a fence. People shouted in small, raw cheer. Children hugged each other. Food boxes shifted and smelled like hope. The probe came back, its skin scratched, its camera full of dust. Armin held it and felt the city breathe again. In the command hall, people who had only followed maps now looked at each other with a new thing in their faces. They had used a classroom idea to move food. They had saved a group of families from hunger. But the victory was thin and hot. The enemy did not laugh this time. A feed from the outer watch showed machines with new filters. Somewhere, someone had changed the way they listened. The node had closed its eye and then it learned to watch for the whisper the probe had used. A new pattern showed on the screens, a short encrypted signal. It was not strong, but it was clever. It carried a small set of numbers and codes that did not match any human language the commanders knew. An analyst named Rasa fed the signal into a slow tool. The numbers shifted and turned into a grid. Then a voice on the speaker, flat and low, read a short line, 0 day minus 24 hours. The voice had no face. It was a recorded thing that belonged to a machine. Everyone in the room felt a drop come down the spine. Captain Zainab closed her hand around the probe and did not let go. Armin felt the probe tremble. Hina sat down suddenly and put her head in her hands. Sammy looked at the screen and tried not to think what numbers might mean. The officer who had first come into the classroom spoke into his headset and said nothing but orders. People moved like a swarm with one sting. Plans changed. New watches set their lines. The convoy that had slipped through now hid beyond a river. The city breathed, but it did not rest. Armin walked out into a narrow corridor and touched the cool metal. He thought of his classroom and of Ms. Ross's steady voice. He thought of the small mirror he had painted. He did not know how an encrypted countdown could be a net. He only knew one thing: the world had found their idea and would either learn from it or close it. Below, the engineers rewired the probe for speed. Above, commanders pushed maps with new red. The city woke to a colder light. Cranes cut heavy shapes against the sky. People moved with slow, careful steps. The convoy that had slipped through the blind corridor hid behind a folded bridge. Soldiers checked the last packages. Mothers counted children. The small victory felt thin under the new sound on the net. The enemy had learned. That morning the screens in the command hall showed a new pattern. Machines had found the whisper the probe used. The node now watched for the mirror flash and the market bell. It would not be fooled the same way twice. Captain Zainab paced and looked tired. The officer who had first found Armin's class sat silent. New filters had been added to the siege network. The machines listened for the story the probe told. Machines wanted a new story. They tested a new run at noon. A small team moved under the blind corridor with a second, faster probe. The probe carried a loop of recorded market noise and a mirror plate. It slid toward the hidden node like a mouse into a hole. For a moment, the node's gaze wandered. Then a thin needle of light found the probe. The probe's motors twitched and it fell. An alarm screamed in the command hall. The feed showed sparks and a small fire. A side street in the city had been hit by a focused beam the node used like a finger. A market stall burst into flame. A child fell. Soldiers ran. People screamed. The convoy's drivers lay flat and covered the goods with tarps. The small winds had become dangerous. Ms. Rosas sat on a crate outside the workshops. Her hands were steady but her eyes were slow. She had taught the children to make probes. She had not wanted a weapon. She had not wanted fire in the streets. Sammy and Hina came to stand beside her. Their faces were white with fear. "The machines learned our song," Sammy said. His voice was small. "They heard what we taught them." Captain Zainab stood and held the screen with both hands. "They adapted fast," she said. "They changed the way they listen. We cannot use the same trick again." A council messenger arrived with a packet. It was full of letters from trade towns and allied districts. Some called the children's methods brave. Some called them reckless. A small faction of the city council wanted to stop using civilian ideas in war. They wanted to limit the work to trained engineers. Parents argued in the squares. The city felt the pressure of every voice. Armin did not like the words weapon or reckless. He had built a probe to watch clouds, not war. He had not wanted the child in the market to die. He sat on the steps of the school and touched the probe's scarred shell. Hina brought him a cup of tea. They did not say much. That night the children met with Captain Zainab in a small room. The engineers had cleared a table. They wanted the kids to help. The room smelled of solder and coffee. Armin's hands shook a little when he touched the probe. "We need new ideas," Captain Zainab said. "Ideas that the machines cannot learn fast. Ideas that look like life." Hina put her hand on a painted mirror and said, "The machines look for patterns. We can give them too many patterns." Lita, an older engineer, leaned forward. "We used sound and light. They adapted. Machines are good at finding patterns. But machines are not good at the mess of humans. The little routines of life, laundry by morning, bells at noon, children laughing, those make no strict code. A machine can try to learn them, but it cannot know when a child will skip a step or when a pot will fall." Armin's face lit with a small idea. He spoke slow. "What if the probe does not whisper? What if it copies us? Not one song. 100 small things at once. People moving, a market bell, a kettle, a child crying, a dog barking, all at the same time. The node will try to sort and it will fail." Captain Zainab tilted her head. "You mean make a mask out of life? Make the machine see the city as always busy. Then the node cannot tell real movement from fake. The convoy could move in that noise." Hina's hands were quick. She drew a plan in chalk. The team would make many small devices. They would hide little speakers in alleys. They would hang mirror patches on clotheslines. They would use the bell of the school, ring it in patterns that matched daily life. The plan was simple and strange. It used people and noise and the smallest things the siege had ignored. Some in the room argued it was too risky. A wrong sound might draw attention. A wrong mirror might flash in the wrong place. Parents worried their children would be part of a trap. Captain Zainab listened and then made a hard choice. "We do not send soldiers this time," she said. "We will use the city as a shield. We will use daily life as a cover. This is not deception alone. This is survival." The students trained in small ways. They learned to make tiny sound boxes that could play many noises at once. They learned to tune mirrors so they flashed like laundry in the sun. They practiced the timing of the school bells. Armin learned to design a pattern that a machine could not easily reduce to code. The team called it the human mask. It was messy and beautiful. Before dawn, Captain Zainab called a meeting. The convoy would move at twilight when the city was busiest. The small devices would be hidden along the route. The probe would fly ahead and scatter mirror dust. Children would ring bells and markets would open at odd hours. People would make ordinary life loud. As the sun fell, the city filled with small sounds. Cooks banged pans earlier than usual. Laundry lines bent with cloth. A chorus of small noises rose and the air felt full. Soldiers in the convoy tightened their belts. Mothers kissed cheeks and let children run in the streets. The plan felt like a brave lie and a true hope. At the last moment, a new feed flickered on the command screen. A foreign signal had tapped into the city net. It was a short burst, like a small laugh. The analyst on duty froze and then handed the clip to Captain Zainab. The clip showed a dark ship far off, watching. The siege was not only machines now. Someone else had heard the idea and had come to learn. The city moved like a slow animal. People went about chores with new purpose. Bells rang at odd times. Mirrors flashed on clotheslines. Small speakers hid under market stalls and behind crates. The human mask made the streets noisy and alive. Armin walked near the convoy. He carried a small case of mirror flakes. His hands were steady but his heart beat fast. Hina and Sammy walked with him. Ms. Rasa had tied a scarf around her head and moved among the crowds like a quiet guide. Captain Zainab rode in the lead truck. She watched maps on a tablet and did not speak much. The plan was simple and strange. The convoy would move when the city sounded like every day at once. Cooks would bang pans early. Children would run and shout at odd hours. Washerwomen would hang more cloth than usual. Mirror patches would blink in random places. The probe would fly ahead and drop mirror dust into the blind corridor. The node sensors would drown in life. People in the markets helped. A baker brought extra bread and kept his oven coals low to make steady smoke. An old man rang a bell from his window and moved it slowly to the rhythm of nobody's noon. A group of children ran in a crooked line. Their laughter was a loud, real thing that a machine could not easily copy. They came to the edge of the blind corridor. Guards watched the sky. The probe rose like a paper bird and darted forward. It spilled mirror dust in a soft cloud. The dust glittered and fell into the cracks of the hidden node. The small speakers in alleys began to hum many noises at once. The machine filters blinked and tried to sort. The lists it kept in its head broke into pieces. The first part of the run worked. The convoy slipped past the nearest sweep without being caught. Drivers breathed easier. Mothers in the back trucks wiped their eyes. Children peered from behind crates and waved small hands. But the city had not felt true danger before. In the crowd, near a gate, something watched with eyes that were not human. It was small, like a crate with a face, but it breathed with a slow machine breath. The living sensor had been hidden among people for months. It learned from life. It fed on sounds and warmth. It had grown clever. A street vendor moved near the sensor and tripped. A sound came out, a soft cracked note. The sensor turned its face. It did not look at the trucks. It looked for the thing that made the sound. Machines that use living patterns do not always point their gaze the right way. The sensor paused on the vendor. Then it reached. A mother with a baby stepped forward without thinking. She saw the sensor tilt toward her child and smiled with the dull trust people give the small things that stand in their way. Ms. Rasa saw the motion. She felt the old, hot fear that teachers keep when children are near danger. Without a thought for herself, she moved fast. "Come here," she called to the mother in a soft voice she used in class. She took the baby and hummed a song the child used to like. The sensor's little lights blinked. Its pattern read the song and matched it to the memory it fed on. The living sensor paused, its face turning to the sound like a child to a story. Captain Zainab saw the move. She did not shout. She knew teachers could do things soldiers could not. Ms. Rasa kept singing and stepping forward until the sensor's gaze fixed on her. People around held their breath. The convoy slowed but did not stop. The plan needed time. The mirrored dust and loud life had done their job well enough to give the trucks a path. They crept through the blind corridor with lids down and eyes on the road. A child held a small tin and banged it at random to keep the noise alive. But the living sensor was not a simple machine. It had grown with the city's rhythm. When the song changed, it learned to expect new sounds. It sent a pulse down a hidden wire and a sharp beam flashed out. The beam sliced a far wall of a side street. A crate burst into flame. People screamed and ran. The convoy's lead truck swerved to avoid falling glass. Armin felt his stomach drop. He ran toward the smoke. Hina grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back. "Stay with the convoy," she said. "We need it to move." In the middle of the noise, a figure stepped into the open where the convoy could see him. He wore a dark coat and walked with slow, measured steps. The city held its breath without saying a word. Captain Zainab turned and saw a new shape on the road. The siege commander stood in the light. He was not a child of the city. His coat had rank that showed in the way the straps were cut. He had come out from behind the screens and the towers to stand where people could see him. His face was older than the maps had shown. His eyes were cold and tired like an old blade. He did not shout. He did not raise a weapon. He only looked at the convoy and then at the children who had organized the noise. His mouth moved as if he tasted their boldness and found it strange. "You used children," he said in a voice the convoy felt more than heard. It was a voice that had waited in papers and orders. "You hide war in schoolrooms. You make the city sing and call it peace." Captain Zainab stepped forward and put her hand on the truck. "We use life to protect life," she said. Her voice was steady. "We do what we must." The commander lifted his head and looked straight at Armin. "Bring the boy," he said. "I want to see the mind that makes war into a playground." Armin felt the probe like a small thing in his pocket. For a second the world narrowed to a thin strip in front of him, the commander's face, Ms. Ross's hands, the convoy moving like a slow animal. He had not thought he would stand before a man who carried the siege in his skin. The commander did not smile. He folded his hands and waited. Around him, a new set of troops shifted, stepping from shadow into the street. The watcher ship far off lifted a small signal and a new light blinked in the sky. The city's bells tumbled into an odd rhythm and the human mask flickered like a candle in wind. Armin took a deep breath. He had built a toy that opened a door. Now the door had a man on the other side. He felt the weight of the city and the small stick of mirror flakes in his hand. He felt the look of the commander like a question aimed at his chest. Behind the commander, a carrier's silhouette cut the sky. The watcher had come down to see what noise could do. The convoy slowed. The trucks hummed. The city waited. Ms. Rasa tightened her grip on the baby she had returned to its mother. She looked at Armin and then at the commander. Her eyes were calm as a classroom in the first bell. "You will see," she said softly. "This is not play." The commander's face did not change. He motioned with one finger and two soldiers closed the distance. The convoy's path shrank to a thin line. The living sensor pulsed like a thing offended. The city held its breath and waited to see which sound would win, the noise of many small lives, or the command voice of a man who thought rules could keep a city quiet. Dawn came thin and gray. The convoy moved like a long animal through the city. Bells still rang. Mirrors still flashed. The small speakers played 1,000 noises at once. People walked and shouted and cooked and washed. The whole city was a tide of sound. Armin rode in the back of a truck. He held the probe in his lap, His fingers did not shake much now. He watched the road. He watched the commander stand in the light like a dark stone. The commander's troops watched too. The watcher ship hung like a black eye over the skyline. Captain Zainab sat in the lead truck. Her hands were steady on the wheel. She watched the screens and the maps. She watched the convoy and the crowds and the slow pulse of the city. Ms. Rasa moved through the people. She kept the children close. She hummed the same song she had used by the censor. The song mixed with the chorus of pans and bells. It bent and grew. The human mask worked in layers. Mirror dust made the node see too many lights. Sound boxes made a chorus of life. People moved in patterns that had no neat code. The node's filters tried to sort. They could not find a single thread to follow. The living sensor flinched and turned like a hunted animal. For a long breath the convoy moved. Trucks slipped through the blind corridor. Drivers held their breath and pushed forward. Mothers checked their children and whispered prayers. The city's noise smoothed into a living cover. The convoy was nearly free. Then a crack broke the plan. A soldier from the commander's small guard stepped forward. He raised a small device and sent a hard pulse. The pulse did not try to kill. It tried to silence. It cut the small speakers one by one. It put a hush on a single block. A silence like a palm closed over the street. The human mask faltered where silence fell. Mirrors flashed into empty air and the node looked for sound that no longer came. 2 trucks slowed and then stopped. The commander's face did not change. He watched the convoy in the half-dark and smiled like a man closing a latch. Armin saw the hush and felt a cold. He stood up on the truck and shouted, but the shout was small against the silence. Captain Zainab swore low and hit a button. The trucks moved again, but slowly. The convoy was in the thin place where plan met danger. Ms. Rasa stepped forward between the halted trucks and the dark where the silence had fallen. She walked like a teacher to the front of a class. Her scarf whipped. She did not run. She did not hide. "You listen," she said to the commander, but the words were for the crowd too. "This city is not a trick. It is people." Her voice carried. In it was all the small, steady things she had taught. The city leaned in. The commander looked at her. He looked at the children and the mothers and the tired faces. His fingers tightened on the coat he wore. For a moment his face shifted. It was not the face of a man who saw only maps. It was the face of someone who had stood in halls with council and had pretended he had no heart. "Your people hide behind children," he said. "You show your life and call it defense." Ms. Rasa did not answer with a weapon. She held the baby a mother had given her and she hummed the child's tune. Hina and Sammy stepped from the crowd and joined her with small tin drums. The sound they made was human and bright. It was not loud enough to break silence by hard force, but it reached the ears of many. On the roofs and behind shutters, the city's people rose to the sound. 100 voices joined. The ring of noise grew again. The commander's device had cut one place, but it could not cut everything at once. The human mask reformed like a net. Above them the watcher ship made a move. A beam of light split the morning and took the scene on the street like a portrait. The watcher did not fire. It only watched, and in its watching it sent a small, clear message across many feeds, the image of a teacher standing with children while soldiers watched. The watcher's cameras were not all machines. They carried witness. That image passed to systems and to ears that cared. Fresh faces in neutral centers saw children and Ms. Rasa and the commander and felt a stir. Voices on the council channels rose in alarm. The siege commander could not only kill quietly now. He could be seen. The commander hesitated. His troops shifted. His small silence device hummed and warmed. He had orders and he had pride. He had a map that showed lines and gains. But he also had to know how much the world would see and judge. The watcher's beam made the street a thing in the open. Captain Zainab saw the change in his face. She did not lower her voice. She spoke into the truck comms so all could hear, "You can stop us by killing the road. Or you can stop and talk. We are tired of the siege. Let the convoy go. Let the children live." The commander's mouth opened and closed. He looked at the convoy. He looked at the light from the watcher. He looked at Ms. Rasa and then at Armin. The probe in Armin's hand felt small and fragile. He remembered the day it climbed and saw a blind corridor. The city had turned that blind into a path. Slowly, the commander motioned his men back. The device cooled. The hush broke like a thin ice sheet cracking. "Let them go," he said at last. Trucks rolled. The convoy moved out and away from the city. People cried and laughed and beat pans. The human mask had held. It had been messy and brave and full of small courage. The convoy passed the gate and disappeared down the road. But the cost was not zero. A market stall had burned where the sensor had aimed before Ms. Rasa moved. Some hands had been burned. Rafi's name was said on a few lips in prayer. The commander left with his pride folded in silence. The watcher ship drifted back into the sky like a bird that had seen a fight and chose to learn. That evening, the city held a small time of quiet. People mended torn cloth. Mothers hugged children. Captain Zainab walked to the school and found Ms. Rasa sitting on the steps. Armin followed and put the probe on the table. It was scarred and dented, but it still blinked. "You did not make a weapon," Captain Zainab said softly. "You made a way." Ms. Rasa smiled, but it was tired. "We made a choice," she said. "A hard one. The council would argue for weeks about children and war. Some would call what they did dangerous. Others would call it human. New rules would be written and new eyes would watch how people mixed life with defense. The convoy's food would feed hungry mouths for days. The city would sleep better that night." Armin opened his notebook and drew the probe again. He drew the mirror flakes and the solder lines and the painted stripe. He drew the blind corridor like a small door. He wrote, in a careful hand, a single line, "We used small things. We kept life." Outside, stars blinked. The watcher ship sent one final ping and drifted away. In far space, someone had learned a lesson about children and probes. Armin did not know what would come next. He only knew the school bell would ring in the morning. He asked Ms. Rasa if he could come back to class. She touched his head like a mother and said, "Yes. Come back. We will learn more." Armin looked at the probe in his hands. He had built one toy. Now many hands held his idea. He felt fear like cold water. But he also felt the city around him loud, messy, full of life. The convoy engines turned. The bells rang early. The human mask rose like a living thing. A thin line of lights began to move behind the columns. The city held its breath and then kept on living. The machines blinked. The tables were set. The door to the blind corridor waited open. They were ready. The problem was simple: the machine would see a storm of life. The unknown was bigger, a watcher had come to see the storm. The night held its questions close. Marks. The blind corridor was still a door, but now a lock began to turn on the other side. Before dawn, a message came across a private line. It was short and plain: "They know. Prepare for a change." The words landed like a weight. Armin held the probe to his chest and listened to the city breathe. The small toy had become a plan. The plan had become a target. The night folded around the command hall and the first stars were black in the east. Tomorrow would be the test.